Hello, welcome to Home Harvest. Today I'm going to be starting onion and asparagus from seed. I start these crops so early because I have a short growing season. Onions have a long growing season. That's why it's important you want to give them a good head start inside, especially if you have a short growing season. They bulb by the length of daylight in your area during the summer. You want to make sure you get the correct one, either short day, intermediate day, or long day. Also, another thing to keep in mind when you're starting your seeds, the date to maturity is based off of the date that you transplant them outside, not the date that you start them inside. And that goes for all seeds. That's one thing that I had wished I had known when I first started. And for the asparagus, they're pretty straightforward. The perennials, if you can get perennials in your garden, I highly recommend them because once they're established, they're really kind of a low maintenance food that will just come back every year. So I started some asparagus from seed last year and put them outside in a 4x8 bed and decided that I wanted to grow enough to eat fresh and to freeze. So I'm building another 4x16 bed just for my asparagus, and they take about 2 to 3 years to establish, but those will be transplanted outside about a week after my last frost, because when they're babies they are a little bit sensitive. So a week after my last frost will be about June 5th. And then for the onions, they're going to be transplanted outside about 5 weeks before my average last frost, which is about April 17th. Or you can get the crowns for asparagus, but the reason why I start them from seed is because you can get about 30 seeds for like about $8, I believe, on Johnny Seeds or from any seed company, and they're going to be a lot cheaper than the crowns. The crowns are going to be pretty expensive, especially with asparagus. If you're trying to grow enough to have a steady harvest for 1 or 2 people, you need quite a few per person. And so with that 4x16 bed, I'm planting 32 plants, and the other 4x8 bed, I believe I have like 25, maybe 20 plants in that bed, and that will hopefully be enough for 2 people to have enough for fresh eating and freezing. So we'll see. I've been gardening since 2022, so I'm still learning and still experimenting, but this will be my second time starting onions and asparagus from seed indoors. The onions I did start last year. I didn't get onions as big as I had hoped. I believe it had to do with me not providing it with enough fertilizer. So I'm really hoping that I can get them right this year. They just ended up, I got all the onions that I planted, they just ended up being really small. So I really hope that I can get big enough onions for storage this year. I'm trying to grow enough to last for a year. So we will see. Not all onion varieties are good for storage. So you want to make sure that when you're picking out your onions that they specify that it's good for storage. Another thing I want to mention about the asparagus is they can take a long time to germinate. They can take anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks to germinate. So that is another reason why I'm starting them so much earlier before I'm going to be transplanting them out. I believe I'm starting them about 20 weeks before they're going to get transplanted out. But if you factor in the 2 to 8 weeks they can take to germinate, that's really not that long for them to get established before they go outside. I've never tried growing onions from the bulb, but I've heard that the bulb onions are on their 2nd year, and typically that's when onions go to seed or flower. And when they do that, it gets a big thick stem or stalk through the onion that you can still eat them, but it's going to take away from a lot of your onion because that stalk is going to be so thick. And I've also read a few things about how it can affect the taste of the overall onion as well. So I just don't want to risk that, especially where I'm trying to grow them for storage. I'm going to stick with the seeds. I have a setup. If you don't have a setup, then maybe that is something that would be worth it for you. I like to start my onions from seed because There's a lot of different benefits. One, it's a lot less expensive. You have a lot more varieties to choose from. If you go to your big box stores to try to buy onion seeds, you may get lucky, but a lot of the times I find they're actually selling varieties that don't even grow well in our climate. So and typically they don't specify whether it's short day, long day, or intermediate on the seed packet either. So that's why I like to go online for Johnny Seeds, because you can pick through all kinds of varieties and they have the descriptions and all the information that you need to make sure that it's going to do well where you are. Another thing that's good about buying onion seeds from a seed company is that you can actually pick disease resistant varieties. For onions, it's not as important because most onions are just naturally disease resistant, but for all other seeds, it's really good, especially when you're growing organic, to try to find something that's going to be disease resistant in your climate. I keep notes of everything, all my plans for planting these out. I'll do the calculations, figure out how many onions I'll be able to fit in my bed and what spacing is going to get me the size that I want. The closer that you put them together, the smaller the bulbs will be, and the further apart you put them, the bigger they'll be. But I like to find that happy medium where I can put them just close enough where I'll still get big bulbs but not sacrifice space. That way I can plant the maximum amount of onions in the space that I have designated for them. And then I make sure I make a note of the date that I plan on transplanting out once I've done my research, and then the date that I'm going to start them inside. That way I can just go through my schedule and look to see what's next. I organize it by date so I can just see what's next in my seed starting calendar. And then I'll make sure that I also put in any notes about how to fertilize and things of that. I'll put it up so that you guys can kind of take a look and see what I'm talking about. One more thing I want to mention about the onions is when you buy seeds, you want to try to use as many as you can in the first year, because the second year the germination rate goes way down. So you're not going to be able to rely on those seeds the second year. What I do is I'll just use, if I have any left over, I'll just sprinkle them in the bed outside when it comes April 14th comes. I won't even bother starting them inside because I'll try to grow them as scallions. All right, let's plant some onions. I have my Pro Mix soil that I get. I like to get this stuff because it's very compact and you get a lot for your money, plus it's organic. And then I'm gonna go ahead and sift that to make sure I get any sticks out. I always like to sterilize my seed starting mix with boiling hot water before I plant them. I don't know if these this specific soil has issues with fungus gnats, but I have had them in the past and I don't want to risk it. So I'm going to go ahead and sterilize it. And then I have 72 cell trays for my onions, and then I got 32 cell trays for the asparagus. So I'm going to go do that and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. I just used my sink. The water gets like steaming hot, so it's fine. It's a lot less time than it is to, sorry, my dog wants to say hi. This is Baloo, my Border Collie Australian Shepherd mix. You'll probably see a lot of him. He is a mama's boy. Hi, hello. All right, come on, get down. I'm gonna go ahead and mix this up. You usually need a lot more water than you think because this seed starting mix takes a lot to absorb the water. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix it up and see how much more we need or if it's ready. So I don't know how well you can see that, but it is still very dry, and I just ran the water in here for a couple of minutes. So we will go put some more in. We're looking for like a brownie batter consistency, I want to say. So you want it to still hold its shape. You don't want it to be sopping wet, dripping wet, but you want it to be able to hold its shape when you squeeze it and let it, and still have it crumble. So I believe this should be good. We'll see. So if I'm squeezing it, it's holding its shape, but it's also crumbling easily. So that is perfect. Now I'm just gonna fill my little trays. These are gonna be for the onions. Blue is having a little bit of a hissy fit right now because I am not giving him my attention. That is common. So I'm just gonna put that in there and then take my fingers and just kind of firm it in there. You want to try to get as much mix in these cells as you can because they're going to be in there for so long, and you want them to be able to have a nice compact soil structure to grow in. I did run out of seed starting mix, but I got one of the onion seeds trays filled. Well, I didn't run out of seed starting mix. I have extra. I just have to sift more and sterilize more. So I have this 72 cell tray filled, and then part of my 32 cell tray for the asparagus. And also I wanted to mention the reason why I'm doing my onions in the 72 cell is just preference. I have the extra space to plant them in a single cell versus a lot of people just use these. This is 4x4 and this is 4x4. And just fill that and plant like about 25 seeds per container, which saves a lot of space. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just prefer, you have to take them out individually and separate them that way and plant them that way. I just prefer to be able to pop it out of this one cell and plant it like that. So that's the only reason why I'm doing that differently. And then this is sphagnum moss. I just get this to sprinkle over the top once I've planted my seeds, and it helps reduce mold and also increases seed germination. So we are going to plant some onion seeds. I have this from Johnny Seeds, and you can't see that, but it's Patterson. It's a yellow onion from Johnny Seed. The packet comes with 250 seeds, and they're about 104 days to maturity. So you want to sow indoors in a flat, late February, mid-March, 1/4 inch deep. I'm just gonna take them. 1/4 is not a lot. I'm just gonna show you real quick. So that's what I got. And then this is what the seeds look like. They're just little. Not too little though. Makes it easier to sow, but once you get it in the soil, you can't find it. Okay. So now I'm just gonna I love this, using this. It's a little chopstick. You can use the back end of a pen or your finger, whatever you want, just to make a little indent. And you don't have to be too specific. I know it does say 1/4 of an inch, but really that's just a general guideline. it's still going to come up no matter what. I mean, you don't want to do it super deep, but if it's a little bit deeper than what the package says, you'll be fine. If it's too shallow, you might have issues with it not being rooted well, but I would rather go on the deeper end than the shallow end, but unless it's something that only needs to be surface sown. And you just want to keep an eye out for any twigs that you might have missed, because that can stop the root growth or stunt the root growth. I'm aiming for, I think, about 150 seeds. So some of them I'll have to double sow because I only have 272 trays and I only have about 250 seeds. So I can't double sow in every cell, but if I'm unsure if I got one, I will just put 2 in just to be safe. Now I'm just going to take some of the dry soil and kind of sprinkle it around a little bit right over the top of the hole, just so it has good soil contact. And there was a couple that I don't think got quite in the hole, so we'll just do this just to make sure they're all covered. And then I'll go over it with a sprinkle of the sphagnum moss and probably spray it just a little bit to settle that dry soil in a little bit. Okay, now I'm just going to go through each one and pat it down. Make sure it's all getting good soil contact. Then I'm going to take my sphagnum moss and just lightly sprinkle a little bit on the top of each cell. This is not necessary. It's just something I like to do. I've had issues with mold before, and also it helps speed up germination. So, and it's kind of like serves as a little bit of like a mulch too, to help keep the soil moist on the top layer for when they're germinating. I'm going to water them in. Now, just want to make sure you label them. I'm just going to use this painter's tape and label the tray. Now they're ready to go under the lights. Light strength matters. For seedlings, I use lights in the 5,000 Kelvin to the 6,500 Kelvin range with a minimum of 5,000 lumens. You can use LED or fluorescent grow lights. I buy shop lights because they're more affordable than grow lights. They work just as effectively. You want to make sure that your lights are 2 to 3 inches above the tops of the seedlings. And if you see any signs of yellowing or browning, just move them up about an inch or 2. It's important to keep your lights on for a minimum of 14 hours a day. You don't want to go any less than that or you'll get weak seedlings. You can keep them on longer than the minimum, and that will just improve the strength of the seedlings. Another way to make sure that you have strong seedlings is by adding airflow by using a small fan. The ideal soil temperature for germination for onions is 68 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 to 25 degrees Celsius. For asparagus, it's 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 to 24 degrees Celsius. You want to make sure you're using a heat mat for your asparagus and maintain 70 to 75 degrees for at least the first 3 weeks or until they're 2 to 3 inches tall. but it's important to make sure the topsoil doesn't dry out. So just keep an eye on that because it can cause root damage. Most vegetable seeds don't need light to germinate, but if light isn't available as soon as they emerge, then they'll get extremely leggy trying to find the light. So I just turn the lights on after a few days just to be safe and make sure that it's there when they come up. After you initially water in your seedlings, I move to bottom watering versus top watering. This prevents mold and root rot, especially if they'll be in the trays for a long time like these will. You don't need to start feeding your seedlings until they have their first set of true leaves, which is technically their second set of leaves. So the first set that comes up are going to be their baby leaves. Those are going to feed the seedlings up until they get their second set of leaves. Those are their true leaves. That's when you're going to want to start feeding a very low NPK. I wouldn't go any higher than a 5.55, and you're going to feed them at half of the recommended strength once every 2 weeks. So I use a Epsoma Organic Grow All-Purpose Plant Food. It has a balanced 2-2-2, and it recommends to mix 2 teaspoons per quart of water. So to make things easier on myself, I just purchased a bottle of water that was about 2 quarts. A bottle of water that was about 1 quart. And I use 1 teaspoon of the fertilizer per quart of water. And I'll just use that bottle to bottom feed all of my plants once every 2 weeks. If you're not familiar with what NPK means, N is for nitrogen, that helps promote leafy growth. P is for phosphorus, that helps promote fruiting or roots. And K is for potassium, that helps the plant be able to eat and drink most effectively. Once my onion seedlings are about 7 to 8 inches tall, I'll start trimming them down to about 4 inches. This helps promote strong, sturdy seedlings, which is very important for onions because if that stem breaks, then it won't produce a bulb. So I'll continue to trim them up until about 2 weeks before I transplant them outside. This gives them enough time to heal over before they go out into the elements and can be exposed to anything that may cause diseases. Make sure you're being mindful about overwatering, keeping your lights too far away, or fertilizing too early. Those can be very detrimental to your seedlings. Another thing that can be very detrimental is skipping hardening them off, which is the process of slowly acclimating them to the sun. I like to use the north end of my house because it provides a lot of shade. If you can provide them with some shade or harden them off on a week that it's going to be cloudy, then that's going to really help make it so that they can stay out a little bit longer than if they were just out in direct sun. And they're going to harden off quicker that way as well. Make sure to do your own research on it. It is a very important step. This is my Excel spreadsheet that I use for my indoor start calendar. I make sure I make a note of my last frost date and my first frost date and approximately how long I have of a growing season. And then I note every seed and the company that I bought it from. That way I can always have record to look back if something did really well or didn't do really well. I'll know after I've calculated how many plants I can fit in my space, then I'll put that in there. I organize it by indoor start date. That way I can just scroll down and see what's next on my calendar. Make sure to put the transplant date, how many days to maturity, and the estimated harvest date, and any notes for spacing or seedling care and transplanting. And then typically my maintenance notes are going to be about fertilizing. I have the same thing for the asparagus right here. And I do that for all my seeds. So I'll just scroll down a little bit just so you can take a quick look at my calendar. And I do the same thing for my direct sowing. I want to show you a quick overview of my garden layout and where I'll be planting my onions and my asparagus. This is the layout for the new garden that we just built this past fall. And my onions are going to be going in this bed. You can see this up front of the onions will be facing south. So it'll be a good spot for them. Everything in red are beds that have not been built yet. And that includes the 16-foot asparagus bed back here in my original garden. This is the asparagus bed that was planted last season. And this is the 4x16 bed that's going to be planted or built this spring. That's it for today, guys. I hope you learned something new. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. And join me for my next video where I'm going to show you how I start broccoli and kale seeds inside for a spring harvest. I'm also going to show you how I start my brassica seeds inside for a fall harvest, including my Brussels sprouts. Make sure you like and subscribe, hit that notification, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy gardening!